The Minnesota Vikings have a lot of curses to deal with. The kicker position seems cursed. The 27-yard line also seems cursed. We could go on all day. So instead, we'll just lump them all together, as I believe they all stem from the fact that the entire franchise is cursed. Hell, it's not even a curse at this point. It's just complete damnation. Where do I even start with this team? Minnesota is a very unique franchise. What separates the Vikings from the NFL's bottom dwellers is that they are very rarely actually a bad team. They have fielded some of the best talents the league has seen, with the likes of Adrian Peterson, Randy Moss, John Randall, Alan Page, the boy Jared Allen, and many more Hall of Famers. Consistent quarterback play has been a long-term issue for the team, outside of the great Fran Tarkenton, who played 50 years ago, Kirk Cousins, who has a curse of his own, and a few random seasons from the likes of Dante Culpepper, Randall Cunningham, and Brett Fuck It and Chuck It Favre. Quarterback has been rather lackluster for decades, but otherwise a lot of talent has passed through the Twin Cities. Minnesota is a winning franchise, with an all-time record of 523 wins, 435 losses, and 11 ties, the best without a Super Bowl. Their winning percentage of .546 is 8th of all time, beating out the likes of the 49ers, Steelers, and more. They are also one of only 4 teams to appear in a conference championship every decade since the 70s. That level of consistency is something rarely seen, and makes the lack of a Super Bowl all the more curious. But if we momentarily remove the postseason from the conversation, the Vikings are potentially a top 10 NFL franchise. In fact, they might even be considered something of a storied one, with a long history, rich traditions, and iconic players. The Vikings can't even blame ownership like some other alleged cursed teams can, as the Wolves are seen by most as being competent owners that don't get in the way of coaching and strive to put their teams in a favorable position to succeed. And as such, the Vikings are a team that players want to play for. Last season, they ranked first in the off-season report card, a player poll that ranks teams by things such as team facilities, locker rooms, nutrition and strength plans, as well as treatment of families. Basically, they treat their players well. Really, the only thing holding Minnesota back as a franchise is a lack of postseason success. And it's here where the Vikings have routinely fallen apart and disappointed. Just as they are consistent in making the playoffs, they are consistent in finding ways to be eliminated from them. Despite being a relatively recent franchise at the time, beginning play in 1961, the first 2 decades of Vikings football would be some of their best, as the team reached 4 Super Bowls in 69, nice, 73, 74, and 76, losing all of them, as unfortunately they were outmatched by their AFC opponents each time. But don't worry, the Vikings have not lost a Super Bowl since, because they have not played in a Super Bowl since in 47 years. Oh, but they have been close. We'll come back to the first Super Bowl in a moment when we're searching for the origin of the curse, but for now I'd like to punish myself by looking at all the tragic instances of playoff failure due to the curse. You ever wondered where the Hail Mary pass came from? Probably not, but yeah, the Vikings are on the losing end of that play's origin story, at least the one that made it widespread in the NFL. Like I said a moment ago, the Vikes reached the Super Bowl in 73, 74, and 76. So what happened in 75 that kept them from 4 straight Super Bowl appearances? And if we're being honest, probably pulling a Bills and losing all 4 straight. Well, the 1975 divisional round happened. Down by 4 with 24 seconds left, Cowboys quarterback Roger Staubach threw a 50-yard game-winning touchdown pass, saying afterwards, "I closed my eyes and said a Hail Mary." And it's not surprising that God answered his prayer to screw over Minnesota, making the refs blind to offensive pass interference that had occurred. Angry at this and other missed calls on that game-winning drive, Vikings fans began to throw shit onto the field at the refs. One fan, who had managed to sneak in a bottle of whiskey, threw it and struck referee Armin Terzian, I think that's how you say it, in the head, knocking him unconscious for a moment and leaving a large gash on his forehead, but he would be able to walk off the field and soon recover. This referee, though, became known for missed calls that had direct impacts on the results of games. After one incident where he mistakenly let a touchback be called a safety, he was suspended by the NFL and ultimately resigned from officiating. Now, I have seen it suggested that this is the origin of the curse, and this guy would actually go on to ref the Vikings in the Super Bowl the next year. However, I think the curse began before this, and this is just a symptom of that, and also an example of the refs dicking over Minnesota. Back to the 1975 game though. To make it even worse, quarterback Fran Tarkenton was informed afterwards that his father had quite literally passed away from a heart attack while watching the game from home. All this turned a game that should have been a celebrated win into one of the darkest and most notorious moments in Vikings history. At least the Cowgirls did lose in the Super Bowl. Let's skip through the Super Bowls, as they were very clearly outmatched in them, and fast forward to 1998, when the Vikings fielded perhaps their best team ever. Randall Cunningham led the league with a 106 passer rating, his top duo of wide receivers, Hall of Famers Chris Carter and Randy Moss, the latter of which was a rookie, and scored a record 17 touchdowns. The offense was arguably the best the NFL had ever seen up until that time, scoring 556 points. The defense was dominant too, anchored by the great John Randall. Oh, but let's not forget kicker Gary Anderson. No, let's not forget him. Anderson finished the regular season with the greatest kicking season in NFL history, being the first ever to convert every field goal and every extra point attempt, as well as setting an NFL record for points scored. He was perfect. Money. Anderson and the Vikings remained perfect in a divisional round win against the Cardinals, but it's in the NFC Championship game against the Atlanta Falcons the following week where the curse would strike. Just over 2 minutes left, the Vikings are in position to kick a 39-yard field goal, which would give them a 10-point lead and likely seal the game. Instead, as we mentioned earlier, the announcer's jinx would occur, and Gary Anderson would miss his first kick of the season. This is arguably the most infamous example of the announcer's jinx, as well as one of the worst moments in Vikings history, and the kicker position for Minnesota has not quite been the same since. Anyways, this gave the Falcons the ball back with a chance to tie the game, and after the Vikings dropped an interception, the Falcons would score the game-tying touchdown on the following play. Minnesota got the ball first in overtime, but were forced to punt to Atlanta, and the two would exchange a couple punts until the Falcons marched down the field to set up their own Anderson, Morton Anderson, for the game-winning kick. That 15-1 Vikings team was the first 15-1 team to miss the Super Bowl, and is not only considered by many to be the best Vikings team, but the best team to not make it to the Super Bowl. You gotta really mess things up to choke to the Falcons, of all teams. At least the Falcons did lose the Super Bowl. Alright, let's just skip the early 2000s, nothing to see here. 2009, led by a resurgent Brett Favre and a young Adrian Peterson, the Vikings were one of the best teams in the league, reaching the NFC Championship. Yeah, this is the Bountygate Game, where the Saints bloodied Brett Favre with 30 hits as the refs looked on in sheer delight. Even still, the Vikings didn't do themselves any favors this game. They turned the ball over 5 times, including this just atrocious attempt by Favre that ended up sending the game into overtime, which they would ultimately lose. The play right before that, they got called for too many men on the field, knocking them out of field goal range, where they could have attempted the game-winning field goal. Well, at least the Aints did lose the Super... God damn it! There's also the 2015 playoff game, the Blair Walsh game. You may not remember it, but Blair Walsh was an extremely promising young kicker who led the NFL and made field goals that year. In a painful-to-watch, low-scoring affair against the Seahawks in the wildcard round, Walsh was the only Viking to score, nailing 3 field goals. He was then set up to kick the game-winning field goal, a 27-yarder, but perhaps jinxed, he shanked it. The promising young kicker was never the same, and out of the league just 2 years later. Now, there have been moments of miracles, such as the greatest play in Vikings history, the Minneapolis Miracle. But these are overshadowed by the abundance of tragedy. After all, the following game after the miracle was the NFC Championship game, where the Vikings got blown out by the eventual Super Bowl champion Eagles. Oh, by the way, the Super Bowl was hosted in Minnesota that year, but that's its own curse we'll get to later. So what is this curse that plagues the Minnesota Vikings? Obviously there's something here, but what exactly? The most commonly proposed origin involves the Ed Thorp Trophy, which was awarded to the winner of the NFL championship from 1934 to 1969 in the pre-Super Bowl era. The trophy was named after a referee, so it wouldn't be the only time a ref screwed over the Vikings. Now, unlike the Lombardi Trophy, which would replace it, the Ed Thorp was not an individual trophy made each year for the winner. Instead, it was a single trophy that was passed around each year, similar to the Stanley Cup, as it also had each champion's name engraved onto it. After the beginning of the Super Bowl era, the Lombardi Trophy would come to replace the Ed Thorp as the most prestigious championship trophy in football. However, the first few Super Bowls were still technically before the NFL-AFL merger, so as independent leagues, the Ed Thorp was still given to the NFL champion before the Super Bowl against the AFL champion. At least that's what was thought. However, around that time, people weren't too sure about its whereabouts, and there would come to be a mystery surrounding the Ed Thorp, because it went missing. The blame fell upon the Vikings, who were believed to have been the last team to win the trophy in '69, right before the merger the following season. The Vikings had been the NFL champion that year, thus technically earning the Ed Thorp, although they would lose the Super Bowl, their first of 4. With it being believed that the Vikings lost the trophy, the story was that the spirit of Ed Thorp had cursed them to never possess another championship trophy, as they were unworthy of handling it, and for decades this seemed like a likely scenario that perfectly explained the Vikings' curse, which seemed to have begun around that time. Many Vikings fans believed that the trophy just needed to be found in order to lift the curse. And in 2015, the Ed Thorp Memorial Trophy was finally found. However, it was also revealed that the whole legend surrounding it was likely not true at all. Turns out the trophy had been in the Packers' possession the entire time, being discovered in the Green Bay Packers Hall of Fame, alongside 2 replicas. Of course, it's the goddamn Packers. Now, I wish I could say it was that simple, and the curse was lifted, that the Packers had cursed us, and ironically uncursed us. However, interestingly enough, it was revealed that the trophy was not passed around until 1969 as originally thought, but only until 1967, a year the Packers won. This means that the 1968 Colts, and of course the 1969 Vikings, never even received the trophy, and indeed their names are not carved onto it. The scumbag Packers just simply never gave the trophy up. Now, Green Bay had won the trophy the previous 2 years as well, meaning it had been in their possession for at least 3 straight years, a streak that also included the first 2 Super Bowls, where the NFL champion would face off against the AFL champion, with what would later be called the Lombardi Trophy being awarded to the winning team. So with the Ed Thorp Trophy no longer being the premier trophy, especially a couple years later when the NFL and AFL would officially merge into one league, it seems it was mostly forgotten about, something I imagine the greedy Packers took advantage of in order to keep the trophy for themselves. To be clear, I don't mind the Packers holding on to the trophy. They did win it more than anyone else, so I think they do have a claim to it, but they didn't have to be such dicks about it. I wish that was the end of it for the Vikings. The trophy was found safe and sound, and thus the curse was lifted. But with the Vikings never receiving the trophy, and therefore not the ones to lose it, it seems this is not the curse we're looking for. Now, you might argue that the curse won't be broken until their name is engraved onto the trophy, but I disagree with this theory for a couple reasons. Even if we restrict the names to the pre-NFL-AFL merger, the Vikings aren't the only missing name. The Colts aren't engraved either from the year before, and have won 2 Super Bowls since. The 1960 Philadelphia Eagles are also missing, and although they seemed cursed for a while, that seems to be for different reasons we'll discuss later, but regardless, have won a Super Bowl since. I'd also point out that for the last couple years of the trophy, it was treated as something more akin to the modern George Halas Trophy, awarded to the winner of the NFC Championship. Given all that, I personally believe the Ed Thorp Trophy curse to be a red herring. Instead, I think the true Vikings curse is something much worse. It's something unknown. The only thing that's known about it is that it dates back to the early days of the franchise, potentially before 1960. 1969. At least with the Pottsville curse on the Cardinals, it's clear how to break it. Just return the damn trophy. But if you don't know why you're cursed, then how the hell are you supposed to know how to break it? I have very little clue as to what cursed the Vikings, and what needs to be done to remedy it, which is about the worst place a team can find themselves. As we continue to make our way through this list, we'll discuss the NFL's other cursed franchises, but as you'll find out, they all have a pretty clear reason for being cursed, and therefore a hopeful way to lift it. The Vikings are the only franchise without that luxury, and therefore are the NFL's most cursed. Whatever plagues Minnesota belongs in the top tier, as the pinnacle of NFL curses, as God hates them. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's a Packers fan. Maybe that's the problem.
Darnold getting messy, going deep, and he's got Jefferson. He's got Jefferson. It's a foot race downfield with Brown. Shifting gears, getting a block. That's 6.